Hello, everyone, and welcome to Indie Insight, the show that aims to bring journalists, creators, and developers together to talk about the one medium that we all know and love. This week on the show, I'm joined by Adam Pipe, Viktor Kraus, and Tib VDP, who are all working on the upcoming Dread XP WarioWare-inspired title, SPOOKWARE. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
I suppose this is the first time I've had three people on the same show, so it'll be an interesting setup for sure, but I'm interested to hear all of the different range of opinions on this, because obviously I know both Tib and Adam, you work a lot on the development side and the artistic side of it, and Viktor, you're very much involved in the music, which is something I want to touch on a little bit in this interview as well. But before we kind of delve into what SPOOKWARE is, all the sort of nooks and crannies that we can expect on August 26th, I want to go to each of you first, for people maybe who don't know a bit about you, and maybe kind of provide a little bit of background into either your development or, in Viktor's case, your music career so far. So if we start with Adam, do you maybe want to give a brief idea as to what you've done in the past and kind of what led you to SPOOKWARE?
Yeah, so I've been doing what I no longer do, but I used to do a game month, which is like doing a game every month. And I used to do that for a really long time, for like more than 2 years. And SPOOKWARE is one of the games that I made during game month. So it's like I always did like small prototypes basically, yeah. So kind of like SPOOKWARE is like much bigger version of like that thing, and kind of like naturally evolved into that thing when we signed a deal with Red XP to publish the game.
Tib, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a bit different. I studied together with Adam, and then that's how we met. But after graduating, I went into like the assistant producer role, and afterwards a bit into development. But I was never really like into the indie sphere until the whole SPOOKWARE thing started, and then I got together with Adam and Viktor to like create this. So this is for me my first big venture into like the real game development and indie stuff.
Mm-hmm. And Viktor?
Yeah, I started working together with Adam on a lot of his game months. The first one that we made together is No Players Online, and that worked really well. And so I was like, I gotta keep on doing stuff with this guy. It's really good stuff. Yeah, and then we ended up doing SPOOKWARE, as Adam said, and yeah, that's my first venture also into a bigger game. Oh, no, that's not totally true. I did sound effects for Burning Night before that.
Fantastic. Well,
yeah, but then...
Yeah, well, I think it's actually really it's funny that you bring up No Players Online, because it's something I want to use as a little transition into SPOOKWARE, because unbeknownst to myself, it was actually my first exposure to your work, Adam, and I didn't know you had developed it at the time when I played it. And I think was that the first sort of game you kind of had, maybe specifically on itch, that kind of blew up a little bit and people started to take notice?
Yeah, I had like this other game that I made like a year before then, also for Halloween, which was a tonsil terror, and that like went a little bit viral on like YouTube and stuff. Mostly because it's like you scream at your mic, and that's like good for YouTubers, I guess. But yeah, No Players Online is kind of like, I think, still my biggest hit. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And with like sort of when it comes to then SPOOKWARE afterwards, it's an interesting one, because I remember talking to Star a little bit about SPOOKWARE when I did my interview with her, and we were discussing kind of how Dread XP for the most part have been, or at least in the horror scene, have been known for these sort of scary games. Like I think very much back to their first collection, stuff like Summer Night, stuff like Pony Factory, all this sort of stuff that, you know, for someone who doesn't cope well with horror, it took me a few nights to get through. But then when you look at something like SPOOKWARE, it's like almost horror light, if you could describe it as that. At least that's what it kind of comes across as. It's almost a gateway drug into horror.
Yeah.
And you know, because I want to talk a little bit about No Players Online, obviously that's very much more like the sort of the anxiety, paranoia style of horror. And Tibbs, you and Viktor, you can touch on this as well, but I want to know what it was like kind of going from what was traditionally a very much more horror and anxiety inducing title to something a bit more for lack of a better word, spooky, as opposed to straight up horror. I don't know who would like to jump in and start with that.
Yeah, I guess kind of like tonsil terror actually is kind of also more like spooky than actually scary. So I'm more used to doing like cute stuff actually with most of the stuff I do. But like I got more into horror because it's kind of I feel like there's like a lot of like exploration you can do with that and like a lot of directions to go with. And I kind of like the mix of doing like spooky and like actually scary and cute stuff as well. And actually, No Players Online was my first attempt to make an actual scary game. I was like, now I'm going to sit down and do something that's actually scary, you know. And some people think it's scary, so that's good. But yeah, I guess Spookware in a way is more like going back to my roots. It's more like cute, and I definitely think the original Spookware on itch is definitely even scarier still than like the big Spookware we're doing now.
Tib, how did you find it? Because is this your, I think you mentioned it's your kind of your first big venture into the indie scene. Had you been doing a little bit maybe of your own bit of development on the side beforehand, or was it kind of this is your first like real, you know, jumping in at the deep end, as they'd say?
Yeah, I developed games like during school for like tasks and stuff, but I never really had like the thought of, oh, okay, I'll like create something for myself from start to finish, because I was a bit more interested in like the producing side, which isn't like development. So it was kind of like oh, what's this gonna be, you know, Spookware? Because I'm not that good with like horror games myself, so it was always kind of like, oh, this is probably gonna be difficult to create, right? Because I don't know much about horror games myself. But I feel like with Spookware, we're like thinking like we want to have it more spooky than horror, and also with like the fact that we're trying to put in like all these movie references and stuff, it kind of lends itself more to being spooky, because if it's spooky, we can like more easily put in references and like other genres. And if you just have full on horror, it's very difficult to like have a school chapter in there, I feel, or like something like lighthearted jokes are very difficult to do in like this very scary game. So I think like when we all sit together and think about the story, it just kind of goes to this more funny, scary theme than just like full on scary, because that's kind of like our humor stuff.
And have you since just to jump off that, have you since, you know, starting Spookware, have you had a crash course in horror games by any chance and just delved into some ones that maybe you're regretting for your own sanity going into?
When we started, DreadX was like, oh, you should play The Hunt, like their most recent collection, and it was then that I realized that I really can't play horror games. I was so scared, because I remember like playing it like at night alone in my room, and I like messaging the guys like, oh, this is way too scary for me, like I can't handle this, like, oh god. And I think I've gotten like a good ways through it now. I still haven't finished it, so sorry like Star Ted and everyone. But I think like the further we go in Spookware, the more I'm going to get used to like making like the scary stuff, and I hope at the end I'll at least be able to finish The Hunt and maybe move on to like scary stuff, because it's difficult.
And then Victor, for you, when it came to, obviously you mentioned that you'd done a bit of music for No Players Online. What was it like then going over to a more sort of lighthearted style approach to the music in Spookware?
It was not super hard, because I also have a lot of experience with doing cutesy stuff. And I think Adam also like picked that out as one of my strengths. So it was not that it was a little bit difficult, because I was thinking at first of the first Spookware, which has kind of another style. The new Spookware that's coming out is very cute and soft and funny and spooky, and the first Spookware we did is kind of grungy, rusty. I don't know, like somebody said it's like watching Halloween movies over at your uncle's. I don't know why, but it does really sum it up so well. Slightly disturbing atmosphere that it commits. And the new Spookware is less disturbing in quotation marks.
Yeah, I was always surprised that like to read like comments on the original Spookware, people being like genuinely frightened at it, just because like the presentation is kind of spooky, because it just throws you in this kind of, you know,
Weird world.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's something I noticed whenever sort of the more promotional material for Spookware is coming out online. Like a lot of the comments are very much like, "Oh my god, this music's amazing! I love the music. This is so great."
Aw.
And what was it? I suppose what was the initial? Because obviously you mentioned the demo for Spookware or the initial itch.io game for Spookware is a little different to what we're getting now in this full release. What was the pitch that you kind of got, and how much did it change over time? For Victor, I suppose.
Oh. The pitch, I think it was doing mostly cute stuff. Adam said to me, that's his order as our CEO, that I'm only going to be allowed to do cute music. If I remember correctly.
Yeah. Definitely, like, Victor is really good at doing cute stuff. And I was kind of, because I feel like when we just started out, he was doing more scary music. I was like, no. And then I picked one of his older songs that's like super cute. I was like, can you do this as like the style of music for this game? Yeah.
That's kind of how it went down.
That's how we got the vibe. Yeah.
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 It's always useful if you can use yourself as a reference.
Yeah.
One of the things Star mentioned when talking about what Spookware was, she said it was kind of like a 90s teen movie mixed with like elements of horror later on. And she kind of noted in the interview, she was like, Adam made it feel like this like American high school like drama thing. But obviously anyone judging by hearing you now, you're not from America. So were there any particular like sort of film inspirations that kind of drew you in that direction? Or is it just kind of a pure coincidence?
Actually, the entire game is like completely based on movie tropes, and like very much like movie inspired. It even starts with like a fake CinemaScope logo. It's like we kind of wanted to kind of feel like a movie a little bit, and it's because like me and Tib, we have like this shared like love for movies. So that's kind of how we bounce our ideas for the game. And like the first chapter, which is in school, is like completely based on like stuff like Mean Girls, but also like one of our favorite movies, which is this Japanese high school film called Swing Girls, which is also really good. And it's just, doing that kind of coming of age, I'm a teen and I hate school kind of vibe, yeah, we're kind of doing the same thing for every chapter. Like in the second chapter, it's like detective stuff, and then we're also like tapping into Ace Attorney, but we're also doing like like Cluedo stuff and like actual like Gosford Park and just like detective movies, and it's really fun to kind of like explore all these like tropes.
And also when asked about it, she mentioned that the horror comes later. Now I want to know, like, so me going in, I get very not paranoid about playing a horror game or even a spooky game, but I'm always like, when is this going to get bad? When am I going to start getting, I suppose, for lack of a better word, the shit scared out of me? And it's like, how is there going to be an element in this? Because it's an episodic release of a game, which I think, first of all, is really interesting and I want to touch on in a second. But when we're going to it, is there going to be more elements of more darker horror, or is it really going to just kind of stick to the more, again, spooky element of it?
We don't want to spoil too much, but
yeah, obviously, yeah, sorry.
maybe that answers your question, but there are already some like spookier parts even in this episode, so we're definitely like building towards something, I guess.
So I'll come back to you after a week the game released traumatized, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to touch a little bit on, because it's a really interesting combination of styles. You have, the RPG elements of Spookware mixed in with these sort of mini games. And for someone who's like, because when you think of RPG, you think of a very long form experience, like a 60+ hour game. And then you think of micro games and it's like something just to play every now and then. Like I think more recently of, I think someone described sort of micro games as more of an electronic toy as opposed to an actual game. So something like Skate, not Skate, but what's the one, the Ramp, which was released recently, is a very much an electronic toy. It's just 4 ramps and a skateboard, and it scratches the itch for all those sort of skate nerds out there. So how have you worked at like trying to blend what would be considered two varying lengths of styles into one? Has that been a difficult process, or is it something that you find is just meshed together?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, like when we were starting with like the first chapter, I think we all had like a bit of difficulty of finding like a good blend between the two. Because when we were making the first chapter, it was very much like, oh, let's do story, and then at the end of the story, we'll have our micro games, and that's a good format. But then once we started playing and other people started playing, we felt that like people had this itch for like more micro games along the way and not just story. So like starting on the second chapter, we like start to experiment with tying these micro games into like a story format. Like there's one micro game we have, and I think it's one of the best ones we had, which is just like a lockpicking micro game. I think it's one of the best ones because it's like you can use it anywhere, right? Anytime a door needs picking. And we start like experimenting more and more with like where can we put more micro games, and instead of just having them separated, like really like blend in. But it's definitely like a difficult process because you're constantly taking the player like out of the normal loop and like putting them in something else. But I think thus far we've like it's pretty successful. We've gotten very positive like feedback from people like, oh, this is like exactly what I wanted here. Like, because not everybody likes an hour of just dialogue. I think it's fun, but you know, you kind of want that like spiciness in there.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned like the blend of opposites, because I feel like that's kind of like the main pillar for the entire game, because it's like a video game, but it's movie, and it's like a long form RPG, but it's like micro games. And it's also, you know, really cute but spooky. And I guess we're kind of like trying to break expectations a little bit with them. But yeah, it's also, I think it kind of stems a little bit from my personal like frustrations with some RPG games and like their length and like how they go. And I really don't like turn-based combat. And it's kind of cool to go for something like very gameplay and combine that with RPG, which is mostly like walking and talking, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to, say, like example, so am I getting it right in saying the sense that the game is very much this story-driven narrative with multiple choices and whatnot? Is there then the case that there's different endings for choices you make, or is it at the moment that'll be something that'll be expanded on in later episodes?
Like a movie, it's mostly linear, but it is very narrative for sure. Yeah.
And so is it less so more of a blend and more of like a, as you mentioned again, this story-driven experience that has a start, middle, and end, and then these mini games have been kind of almost like scattered throughout to kind of almost conjoin different areas of the game. Is it so? Is that the element? And how was it, I suppose? Did you ever, at some cases in development, have to say, okay, let's hold off on the mini games, we're putting too many in, or was that never really an issue?
We want to get as much in as we want, I think.
I don't think it's been an issue thus far. I mean, I wish it was an issue because I think sometimes coming up with like unique micro games that are linked to like the story or the chapter, it's not always easy. So I feel like it's easier to write the dialogues and create the story than it is to like find a very fitting micro game. Because it's always like you have the chapter theme, and then you also have like the part in the story and stuff. There's a lot to combine into one micro game sometimes, where I'm like, oh god, it's gonna be a difficult one. But we've been able to, I think. But yeah, I don't think we've had like a surplus of micro games so far.
And in terms of the story, then have you thought long ahead to future episodes yet about where the narrative will go, or is it something that you're seeing how the first one is received and then kind of playing it from there?
I think it's kind of a mix. I feel like we have a pretty like flexible way of making the game, and like we're able to mold it like as we go. And I think that was like very important, definitely like very early into the game, not having too much like set in stone, so we can like, you know, kind of make the game as you make it, so it kind of feels right, like it flows better. But we do know where it's going, you know. We do know how it's going to end. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's always a good place to start, I suppose. Victor, I'm interested to know, obviously, because the game itself takes sort of inspiration from tropes in movies. When it comes to the score, is there any inspiration from film scores that you drew from, or is it very much just kind of, as was mentioned earlier, kind of, taking something you'd worked on previously and kind of vamping that up a bit?
Oh, I try to be as cheesy as I possibly can with the music. So I'm trying to rely also on tropes. And that's also kind of like in the last chapter, we have like this place that is set in this urban town. That's not the right word. In a big city. Yeah, in a big city. And so what I was kind of thinking of, and I think Adam was encouraging it, was like romantic movies that are set in New York, like When Harry Met Sally and stuff like that. But yeah, so to answer your question, I very much rely on movie tropes and music movie tropes, and try to I don't know, like get that feeling across that most of these iconic scores or something like that have. But sometimes I like to go in the opposite direction. Like for example, there's a game where you are a shark and you eat smaller fish. And like my first association with this is doing like a Jaws ripoff. But then for some reason, I decided that Bossa Nova was the way to go. And like stuff like that can also be a lot of fun to like advert expectations.
Yeah, and it also I feel like the art style we're doing for the actual microgames is much more like macabre and like scary and like realistic than the actual like overworld and stuff. And I feel like it kind of lends itself well that music is kind of cheesy and funny a little bit when like the image of like an actual shark or like a hand that's being cut off or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it makes it a lot sillier.
Yeah.
When it comes to obviously the course of development for the first episode, is there anything, and this is kind of a question for each of you, I suppose, to answer individually, but is there anything that in particular sticks out as a moment that was kind of particularly funny, or something that you kind of, maybe a moment of pure frustration where something went wrong and you had to try and fix it, or I don't know, I'll leave it as open as you want. You can say anything and everything.
Oh, I haven't thought about this.
I think we almost accidentally deleted the whole like all the three ones. That definitely happened. And usually those things always happen right before like our meeting with our publisher. So
that was very frightening. That was a bad one. I mean, we salvaged it, so.
God. Yeah, scary.
Yeah.
Much scarier.
Much scarier than the game, for sure.
Yeah.
This is what happens at the end of the first episode. It wipes your computer.
Oh my god.
Definitely great. For me, the most exciting part is really when like all the micro games, because we have like sequences of micro games like the original game had, where it's just like all after each other. We have that at the end of every chapter as well. And it's really cool when like all the micro games are done and they're kind of polished and curated and they feel really nice, and then they're plugged into the system and it just like flows really well. That's usually like the funnest part for me.
Yeah, that's great.
Did you? Yeah, I suppose whoever wants to answer next on that point can go ahead.
Yeah, I think my favorite moment was reading the dialogue that Thibaut and Adam has written for the first time, because we're all not really writers, so it was a little bit of a gamble, but it really paid off, because the dialogue was just so good when I read it for the first time. I was like, I have nothing to worry about. This is gonna be really funny.
And Tib, is it the same for you, or is there anything else that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I was thinking. I think for me, I think one of like the funnest moments was, I think, at the end of chapter 1 when we were creating the boss game. And I don't want to tell too much about the boss game, but I remember since for that boss game specifically, Victor composed a song, and I think like one of the funnest moments was Victor putting in the song for the first time and us trying to like play the boss micro game and completely failing at it. I think we were just sitting in call like laughing at how bad we were at like the stuff we made ourselves, and I was like, okay. And then just like having to tone it down and make it easier and easier until we were just able to do it. And I think afterwards QA even was still like, I mean, it's kind of difficult. I think that was just like a good moment because we were just like, oh, this is so difficult.
Yeah, for context, it's like rhythm games in the first chapter, and it's doing so he makes the music and also like the rhythm section.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was really cool, and it was super hard, but it was like addicting first. You had to tone it down to like a normal level, so yeah.
The Dark Souls of rhythm games.
We were very close.
Yeah.
It actually, that brings on an interesting question actually, because obviously when people think of sort of an RPG based game, they're obviously going in for the story, less so much more the difficulty in gameplay. Was that a thought process for yourselves going in? Is there a sort of a mitigating part where you can have an easy mode on Spookware, or medium, or hard, or is it kind of like the games aren't that difficult to the point where it's strenuous for anyone who's just going in for a story experience?
So we have like an antagonist in our game, which I won't spoil too much, but he kind of has more control over what's happening. And if you really suck at the microgames, you have like an encounter with him, and he can like sacrifice one of the microgames for you. So it gets like taken out of the sequence, which makes it more forgiving for people. So that's kind of like an easy mode we have. But it's interesting you bring it up because definitely the game does have its like difficulty and like challenging parts. But I feel it's kind of nice being able to have like moments of like frustrating and like exciting, you know, like blood pumping microgames and stuff, and then like being rewarded with story and like being able to chill out a little bit and having like, you know, that curve going throughout the game. It's really fun.
Yeah, we've had, I think, countless hours with QA, like spending time on like each micro game specifically, making it difficult but not too difficult so the player wants to play it again even if they lose. Because I think a lot of the feedback we've seen on the previous Spookwares is that it was incredibly difficult, or some of the micros are incredibly difficult. But now we've had like our QA team from DreadXP that have just been like, oh, like this specific thing needs to be fine-tuned like that. And I think looking at like our microgame sequences from like a few months ago to now, it's like I think it's something that everybody could start, and then the sacrificing helps you if there's like a specific one you have difficulty with. Like we have a market game with math in it that a lot of people like to throw out immediately. So like for those things, you can still like, you know, throw them out.
I can see myself throwing that one out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely at a difficulty point where everybody could beat it with like a bit of practice. It's no longer like for the true gamers, you know.
Yeah. Ultimately, we want the microgames to be that if you fail it, like you're learning more like how it works, so you get it the next time.
Yeah.
But it's good that you mentioned QA, because really having like DreadXP and like their QA team is super good, and it's been really like important for development. Them just like going through the game and making sure the game is actually, you know, like beatable. Because if it was up to us, you would have never gotten past chapter 1. I
think. Probably.
Yeah.
Was there ever a point during, because I know from like QA they'll send you back a batch of notes being like this needs to be changed or whatever. Was there ever a point where you got a note and it just made you laugh, or like it was just like somebody's like oh, this is way too hard, like what is going on, like, or was there someone pure frustration in their notes?
I think we've had like a few microgames where all three of us like, oh, this is pretty normal, and then QA is like, what? Like this game is impossible to beat. And usually we try to adjust to like what QA wants, because especially we have play tests internal as well, and if we see live that somebody's struggling with it, then we're definitely like, okay, maybe like, because I feel like if you develop the game yourself, you know how to play it, so it's a very different mindset. But we have a boss micro game in the second chapter, and I think it's gone through more than 5 iterations of just making it easier and easier and easier. Because I think like we had difficulty with it, but we felt it was possible. But QA was just like actually telling us like we cannot pass the game, like it's impossible for us to progress. And yeah, in the beginning you don't believe it until you like get into a call with QA and they play it for you, and you're like, oh, okay, I get what you mean. And then you just go through all these iterations into making it easier. And I think it's still one of our most difficult ones, but I think it's at the perfect point where it's so stressful that you like start to enjoy. You're like, oh my god, I really need to beat this. I think it's one of the strongest and like one of the most difficult ones.
Yeah. The games I think are the best when they're like kind of tense.
So I think always the best thing is when you play a game and there's an element of challenge, but it doesn't feel overbearing as much as it does, I suppose, as the name would challenging. It's you get to the end of it and it feels like you've accomplished something rather than just being like you've just gone through hell and back to get through one level. There's always talk about sort of more sort of, I suppose, WarioWare-esque games about being on more portable platforms. I know the discussion is always like, well, obviously with WarioWare being a Nintendo property, everyone always mentions the Switch, and I'm sure mobile is another one that you guys have kind of thought about as well. And I know there's a lot of work that goes into porting something to a console and to a mobile, and obviously I'm not expecting that to like happen like anytime soon, given all the work you guys have done on the PC game already. Is there if you had though, and say it wasn't a time factor or a money factor, and you wanted to port it to one console or mobile, which would you choose, and why do you think that would be? Or is it perfect on PC and nobody and it shouldn't go off the platform?
Well, the game is perfect, sure, but we do actually have plans to release on mobile as well, pretty soonish after.
Okay.
Series, so that's exciting.
Should have held my tongue.
Yeah, but for consoles, we are looking into it, and definitely, like for me, I would love to have consoles. Yeah. If
you had to pick one, though, I'm kind of pushing you into a console war here. I don't know why I'm doing that.
If me personally, I would love to have it on Switch, but it's not up to me.
Yeah, I think Switch a fun one. I think I'd love to have it on like just consoles in general, where there's like more control options. I think Switch has I don't know what it's necessarily called, but I think is it gyro controls or something?
Yeah.
Where like the orientation matters, because I think a lot of like our chapters are based on like specific key bindings and like controls. So the more options we have for that, the more like unique stuff we can do, right? So anything like that is like, definitely want to go there.
Of course, we want to have it on the PS5 for ray tracing because.
Just everything.
Victor, the same with you, is it? Or
I would really love to have it on the Switch. I think our game aesthetic kind of leans itself towards that very well.
If it runs on the Switch.
Yeah.
Of course.
Our game is very optimized.
It'll be on the Steam Deck soon, anyways. So
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, I want to touch a little bit on the art style of the game because it's something that drew me very much to it straight away. The music. I suppose at this stage I'm just saying the game in general drew me towards the game because I think it's amazing. But I have to mention all the different little bits and pieces. When it came to the art style, was it Adam? Was it you who led on that, or kind of who was kind of doing all the artwork for that?
Yeah, kind of the way we've been developing it is kind of. I did kind of like a vertical slice, as you could say, of the beginning of the game alone for like a month, and then we got on Quest to do the rest. So we had like a stamp basically, so we know where it was going basically. So yeah, generally, but Thibaut is doing a lot of the art as well. But the general like workflow for him, which is just mostly public domain images actually. Is definitely like my doing. It's not like a pretty way of working, but the result is pretty, and that's important.
Yeah. And was there a particular reason for picking the current art style that we have now, the kind of the more 2D, almost in a 3D landscape aesthetic that you're going for? What was the reasoning behind that, and kind of what was the inspiration? Because like, to me, it looks a bit like sort of like a Paper Mario mixed in with some other type of game that I probably am too uncultured to know. But maybe you could shed a bit of light on that.
Yeah, definitely like the idea for the art style, it's mostly to do with it looks good and it's fast to produce, which is kind of important. But it's I really just love like doing a lot of it has to do actually with like the filters we're using and kind of like the post-processing that's happening. Because there's actually like a lot of like shader magic happening to make it look like kind of like painterly and like wobbly and stuff like that. Yeah, it's definitely I don't know how to say it, but it's we have like I think we watched the movie together, like me and Thibaut. I'm missing the name exactly, but it's this Japanese.
I know exactly. Is it Hannah and Alice or something?
Yeah, Hannah and Alice or something. It's like this Japanese movie, but it's also they're using like pictures and giving it like a painterly style and then doing like rotoscoping on top of it. And we kind of loved it because it was so like economic, but it looks really good. And we wanted to kind of do like a similar style to that movie for the game.
Yeah, it's a style that also both of us could easily do, because I feel like when you have these these highly artistic games, it's difficult, since both of us are doing like the development and the art, it would be difficult for both of us to replicate it perfectly. So when I started on the project and Adam was like, this is what we're gonna do, it took me a while to get used to like the process I had to go through, but in the end it wasn't that time consuming to get used to it and be able to like reproduce it to create new scenes and stuff. And I think that's like one of the main things, just to be able to create like the scenes we have in the game in like a week, 2 week time, like very quickly, and then build a story in those. It's mainly time.
Yeah,
it looks super cohesive.
Yeah, mostly filters.
You talked, actually, this might bring on a decent enough point, but you talked about kind of making at least the art style economically viable and making it quick and it look good and easy to push out. Is there anything that, you know, to people behind who aren't involved in game development might hear that you use maybe a certain program, or you created something in SPOOKWARE that, you know, literally anyone could do if they wanted to, that they might know about?
I think definitely just like the workflow is really like easy kind of, but it's basically you have public domain images which you can find all over the internet, and they're like people, public domain and Creative Commons is incredible, and I love that it exists. There's just like thousands of people making pictures that you can just use commercially. So we just take those pictures, and they're usually like pictures not at all made for textures. So it's like some picture of someone taking, you know, their friend, and then there's like a table in the corner. It's like, oh, that's a good table texture. So we just like crop that out, put it on the model, and it works, you know. But it's really rough around the edges, but mostly because the filters and especially like the painterly effect hides like all the little imperfections and make it look cohesive. Ultimately, like the thing looks really good. And I guess my advice would be a lot of filters that hide your mistakes.
I think since Adam was way more used to this style of like getting around a picture, cropping it and putting on a model, I think the biggest thing for me was to just try it, because how I learned modeling in school was very much like you need to follow the proper rules, which I advise, of course, but with this style it's very much you try it out and you just create it and you put it in the game and you see how it looks. And outside of the game, you might think like, that kind of looks weird, but really in the game, there's a big chance that it works really well. I remember there's one part where I had to like create a chair, and I was like, oh god. And I think I just cut out a chair as like a plane, and I put it in. I was like, oh god, this works. So you just need to like, don't be scared, just try, because it's really quickly. So even if it looks bad, it doesn't really matter because you can just do something else, right? It's 5 minutes of work to cut out a chair.
And definitely the biggest impact to the visuals as well is the lighting. almost all the scenes in the game are like at dusk, for no reason, just because the light angles are the most extreme, which make everything look good. Because if there are more shadows, it's like more contrast and everything like pops out more.
I have one final question before we finish up, and it's more something that you can feel free to expand on as little or as much as you'd like, and it's one for each of you individually. What's one thing people won't be expecting about Spookware?
I think for me personally, I think like the length of the game and how much like content there is. It's definitely we had one article, like I think it was the Stoctoid. We gave them like early access to the game, and they said it was surprisingly high effort. And I don't mean that in like way, but I feel like we're so used to microgame games being very much bite-sized, I guess, and just being about microgames. And I guess with the whole RPG thing happening and just kind of the twists and turns and the different type of control schemes and mechanics we're getting in there, like you're getting like a big package of like, different stuff and variety that I think is really cool.
It's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, that was very good. Wow. I think the depth of the story. I feel like we've put like a lot of effort into really creating these Scalibros as like real characters and like real believable personalities, and like giving them unique personalities. Like when we try to write, then we all make them like interact with each other in different ways and have them all do different stuff. And usually when we have play tests, people are like very surprised at like how much they get to know the Scalibros, and at the end they're like, oh, this one is my favorite because they're always doing this kind of mischief and stuff. So and like together with the Scalibros also, we have a lot of other side characters who are really like putting a lot of effort into like giving personalities and their own unique stories, and some of them come in one chapter and then come back in another one. So there's like a lot of personalities intertwined within the game.
And Victor?
I will be surprised by how many bangers I can.
Honestly, that's true. People have been very happy.
There is so much music. Like we have Victor on pretty much like full time for the game, which is not really that usual in the game industry. But it really like allowed him to just put like sound everywhere in the game, like so different music for pause menus and other menus and just everything. It's just like there's a lot of polish.
Music up. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, but to like for real, I'll go with Adam's and Thibaut's answer as well. Like the scope of the story, I think, is something that people might be surprised by. Yeah.
Well, it's a short and simple and best way to put it, I suppose. You've all been brilliant. Honestly, this has been a fantastic discussion. I want to throw it over to you guys now, though. Obviously, Spookware comes out on the 26th. I would recommend that everyone right now goes and wishlists it, because I don't know how it's helpful, but people tell me it's helpful, so I imagine it's probably a good thing that they do that. And then it'd be even more helpful if they bought the game when it comes out on August 26th. I'm looking forward to playing it. I'm sure all of you are looking forward to seeing how people react to it. Where can people find you guys on social media? I'll again throw it over to each of you individually if you want to shout out everything and anything that you're on.
You can find me on Twitter at Adam P, which is like Adam and then PY for some reason. I don't know why. But also Adam Pipeworks. And you can also find my games on papercookies.itch.ir. So yeah. And you can find Spookware on wishlist.spookware.games.
Very strong plug. You can find me on Twitter at TibVDB. It's TIBVDB. Nice and short.
I want to say before we go on to Victor, for a second there, it looked like there was a rave going on in your room with the lighting, just kind of flickering.
I didn't want to say.
The music life never stops, am I right, Victor?
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I like to do it.
noise cancelling, but there's like music playing on the speaker.
Awesome.
Where can people find you then, Victor?
They can find me on Twitter at Victor Kraus 2. And from there on, and written with a K. That's the important part. I'm the only Victor with a K. And from there on out, you can basically find my other stuff like SoundCloud, YouTube, and all that stuff.
Well, fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all of your guys' time again. SPOOKWARE comes out on August 26th. Everyone should go and download it, buy it, share it with all your friends. Even if they don't like horror, this is probably, as I mentioned earlier, the perfect gateway drug into any horror genre. So again, appreciate all your time. To all listening, I'll hear you all again next week.